I've been using the Samsung Z, and we do say Z in this country, Z Fold 5, for about 3 or 4 weeks now. And as an iPhone user, I've learned 6 things. The Samsung Z Fold 5 has been my main Android device for the last few weeks, and in that time I've taken it to Berlin to do some photo and video testing. I've used it productively, so I've used it to do stuff for this business, and I've consumed way too much meaningless TikTok content on it. So basically, I've been using it as normal. The problem is that yes, I'm normally an iPhone user, and that does skew my perspective of certain Android phones, particularly those that fold, because as iPhone users, we don't get this. Equally, we just want things to work, and with new technology, and foldable phones are still fairly nascent. The reason Apple doesn't make a foldable iPhone is because the tech used to make this, well, it's still, like I say, it's still early days. And because of that, things don't always just work in quite the way you intend, which again, if you're an iPhone user, can be a little bit irritating. However, in the last few weeks, I have managed to get a really good grasp of what this phone is all about, and spoiler, I really like it. But there are some issues. Equally, I am aware that a few iPhone users out there and people who are thinking about buying the iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max are considering one of these. Here's what I've learned as an iPhone user, having used this for the last few weeks. There are 6 things to go through. The first thing is that it is lovely to hold while it's closed. This sounds a bit strange, but when you get one of these in your hands, it's just very satisfying to walk around with like this. For instance, when I was walking around Berlin taking photos, this very rarely went into my pocket. I was just enjoying walking around with it. It's light enough, it's thin enough, it's kind of narrow enough, which has an issue, which I'll come on to later. And weirdly, when you do put it into your pocket, it's really convenient. Compared to the mammoth-sized iPhone 14, which is like putting a small planet into your pocket and gets very irritating, this, given how, big this phone is unfolded, it's just very convenient and lovely to hold while it's like this. Does that matter? Who cares? It's great. Number 2 is slightly irritating, I'm afraid. If you're coming from the Samsung Z Fold 4 or Z Fold 3 or anything before that, and you're hoping for a slightly wider cover screen, you're going to be disappointed. It's still, in my opinion, far too narrow. And the biggest problem with this is the keyboard. And I don't care what people say, I know you can tweak the keyboard, I know you can probably get third-party keyboards and all that sort of stuff, but any tweaking I do to it does not make it any more usable on this display. It's far too narrow, which means every time I want to type, I have to open it up, which isn't a bad thing because it gets you to use this, but it is irritating when you just want to do something quickly on this display. The only benefit of that narrow screen is that it is quite nice to scroll through social media on, but that's it really. Everything else, if you want to do something productively, you have to open the big display, and that just grates. And it's particularly annoying when we have devices like the Google Pixel Fold, which has a much wider display, and that means you can type on it properly, you can do loads more stuff on it. Okay, it does mean, as I mentioned in my review of this, that you're less inclined to open up the big display, but I would take this wider display over this far too narrow cover screen. With devices like the Pixel Fold on the market now and the Honor Magic V2, which is amazing by the way, I will review that as soon as I can, I promise, Samsung does need to make a change to the width of the cover screen. On to better things, and the Samsung Z Fold 5 internal display I think is the best on the market. That might change when I finally try the Honor Magic V2, but we'll leave that for the future. At the moment, in terms of the displays that I've used when it comes to foldable displays, this is the best. This 7.6-inch display with very thin borders is utterly beautiful, and it now matches the S23 Ultra when it comes to peak brightness because it has 1750 nits. It's also very fast thanks to that 120Hz refresh rate, and it has that classic Samsung vibrancy. Yes, there's still a crease, you can still see it, you can still feel it, but we need to remember with Samsung that they've been doing this for quite a long time now. So when it comes to to durability and any concerns about this big folding display, well, you shouldn't really have them. These are very durable. And Samsung is still the best when it comes to dealing with apps that don't conform to this big display size. On the Pixel Fold, you get these great big black borders if an app doesn't fit the screen. For some reason, on the Fold 5, you very rarely see that. Next up is something I thought I'd never say, which is the fact that multitasking is actually quite useful. The reason I never thought I'd say that is because I'm not the sort of person to do multitasking on my smartphone. This massive screen isn't just useful for consuming content, it's actually really handy to get more things done at once. And no, I'm not talking about doing really in-depth productivity stuff, I still use my computer for that, but the ability to be in, let's say, WhatsApp and suddenly think, I need to refer to that tweet or to that message in a different app or that web page. The ability to bring that second app up, put it on the screen, and you can do that with more than 2 apps on the Z Fold 5. It's just, I admit it, very, very useful. And again, it encourages you to use this big display more often, which, if you're spending nearly £2,000 on a device like this, is quite important. Right, onto the camera system, and this isn't going to be an in-depth review of that element of this phone because it's pretty much as good as the rest of the most recent Samsung phones, which means it takes really good photos. I'm now showing you some photos from Berlin, which I took a couple of weeks ago, and I really like most of them. And this is the thing about Samsung smartphones, they absolutely nail the photo most of the time. If the conditions are right, and if you're not taking photos of fast-moving subjects like your kids and dogs and that sort of stuff, you're guaranteed, I think, a pretty good photo. The problem is that occasionally it just gets it wrong. And the way it gets it wrong is by overblowing things like the sky. And you can see that in a couple of examples here. It's just way too blue. This photo taken out of the window of a plane did not look like this in real life. But then you contrast that with some of the fantastic, utterly gorgeous photos it snapped in Berlin. It's quite frustrating, but if you can put up with that occasional misfire, then you'll do some very good photos on the Z Fold 5. Okay, this should be a very good test for the Z Fold 5's front-facing camera. I'm intentionally walking through a very noisy part of Berlin, but I've not changed anything. So the audio you're hearing is the audio straight out of the camera. The video, I'm trying not to get run over, sorry. The video is also straight out of the camera, no tweaks. It's 30 frames per second, 4K. Oh, and stabilization is just turned on. So yeah, let me know what you think. When it comes to video shot on the main camera, it is really good. I didn't test 8K because I don't really understand the point of it, to be honest. But when it comes to 4K UHD, the Z Fold 5 is nearly there. It's nearly as good as the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which for me, until the iPhone 15 Pro Max gets delivered, is still the best video shooter. But this Samsung Z Fold 5 is very close. There's very little weird jerky movements to the stabilization. The dynamic range is really good, and it's just a very nice, clean 4K image. So camera, it's just about there, but it is still very, very good. Okay, my last learning about the Samsung Z Fold 5 and my conclusion about this phone for now is that it isn't, I'm afraid, the best foldable on the market. That award goes to the Pixel Fold, which is still my favourite foldable on the market at the moment. For the Z Fold 5, or the Z Fold 6 really, to steal the crown from Google, it needs a wider cover screen, and Samsung needs to fix or get rid of those lingering camera issues. The other problem for Samsung is the Honor Magic V2, which isn't out in the UK yet. I think it's going to hit the market next year sometime. So when that does come to the UK, and I get my hands on it properly and give it a proper test, I have a feeling it might beat both of these. The foldable game is getting really, really interesting, and what I would love to know from you is which one you'd go for out of these two. Or would you not go foldable at all? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see my full review of the Pixel Fold, keep watching for a link.